coming as we propose today to deal with a couple of matters around which we believe the people of Trinidad and Tobago ought at this stage to be possessed of the facts. The Guardian newspaper of yesterday highlighted a story under the byline, Gary, SSA agents always had the right to carry guns. The Gary to whom reference is here made is the former Commissioner of Police, contracted, not a police officer. He was an experiment that, in our view, which we have stated publicly on several occasions, spectacularly failed. For my own part, this article carries another dosage of his childish and scandalously noisy utterances, which emanates from him so often. He's entitled, of course, in this democracy to be that and to do that. But what he's not entitled to do is to, in serious matters like the matters around the SSA, which is in front of the national community, to mislead the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and especially when it is felt that this misleading is to divert from the truth and from the facts and from the serious issues, the real issues, and the serious questions that several persons must answer in relation to this matter. In this article, it began with the comment that former Police Commissioner Gary Griffith says Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley's assertion that Cabinet only gave the Strategic Services Agency power to have guns last year was Rowley's ignorance of the law. Dr. Rowley, engaging this issue recently, said that he was surprised that the former SSA employee and self-professed spy, Pastor Ian Brown, was armed with police-issued weapons. As you know, and the article continues, Brown's SRP status was revoked on March the 19th, and he returned 4 guns he had access to as an SRP. As he addressed the ongoing SSA fiasco on Wednesday, Rowley said, and I quote, these are not things that are supposed to happen. The SSA did not have the authority to have armed officers until November of last year, when Cabinet approved that after a number of requests. To this, Mr. Griffith responds, the audacity of Keith Rowley to be actually so naive, if not stupid, to believe that the Cabinet has approval to give units in the state approval to have firearms. Keith Rowley, you are a civilian, you are a politician. No Cabinet can give approval for an arm of the state to have firearms. The only person that can do that is the Commissioner of Police. So the comments made by Keith Rowley shows his total lack of understanding as chair of the National Security Council. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister, as chairman of the National Security Council, was quite within his authority and quite right to have spoken in the way he did. He expressed surprise that now fired SRP Ian Brown, who was appointed in February of 2021 as an SRP by the said Gary Griffith in a short stint as police commissioner. The Prime Minister was quite surprised, as indeed I was. We all ought to be, that Mr. Brown would be in possession of 4 assault military-type weapons, even though he was a member of the Special Reserve Police, assigned so by Gary Griffith inside of the SSA. You see, ladies and gentlemen, on the 1st of November, there was a proclamation of an amendment to the Firearms Act, which was effected when we had, on the one hand, requests from the SSA to provide arms to personnel of the SSA as they carry about their duties. That was the cabinets, that was the Prime Minister's, that was the National Security Council's understanding of this. We had a situation in Trinidad in the Judicial matter where a prison officer who was issued with a firearm by the prison commissioner to keep and carry used that firearm against a police officer, shooting him in an incident. And then the question arose as to whether the prison commissioner, had the lawful authority to issue firearms to prison officers outside of their duty, outside of prison walls. The answer that the court properly came to was no. And as a result of that, we went to the Parliament. In the face of the requests from the SSA, we joined the SSA into the consideration in this amendment. And the law was passed in June of last year, and it was proclaimed on the 1st of November 2023. It is to that the Prime Minister makes reference. So that now, the prison officers who always used guns inside of the prison were now permitted to keep and carry these weapons outside of the prison, following from the decision of the court in the Vishal Singh matter. And we included the SSA thereat to allow them to keep and carry weapons. So the Prime Minister, knowing that, no ignorance of the law, understanding that, spoke in the manner in which he spoke. You see, ladies and gentlemen, Section 6 of the Firearms Act outlines that any person wanting to hold arms and ammunition in the generality must be licensed so to do. But Section 7 of the said Firearms Act says that there are certain categories of persons who are exempt from the need for a license in Section 6(1), as I have just described it. And these persons are the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service members, including, of course, municipal police and SRPs, the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, all of the 4 formations of the Defense Force, the director of the Forensic Science Center, and the scientific officers thereat, because they deal with firearm analysis on a daily basis as pertains to their work, gunsmiths who are authorized to repair firearms, customs officers, prison officers, always did in the course of guarding the prison and escorting prisoners in the course of their work as distinct from keeping and carrying. FUEC holders, firearm users, employee certificate holders, you have situations where, in the example of security companies, in the example of the SSA, you will have a firearm user's license issued to the organization, and employees in the organization get firearm users' employees' certificates to be able to carry arms under the purview of that firearm license. And of course, the Cadet Corps, of which I was a member, and thousands of us in this society, we did use firearms on the range and to drill and that sort of thing, and that too is accounted for in the law. So when this childish, yapping former commissioner of police on contract speaks as though the Prime Minister was unaware of what he's speaking about, that has to be firmly and flatly rejected as his ignorance, because we are aware, have been aware, that the SSA from a long time past, in fact 7 or 6 previous directors of the SSA and other intelligence agencies before that would have had an FUL for the purpose of giving FUECs to some of its members, in the case of the SSA, largely for guard duties of SSA properties and equipment, quite different from keep and carry personal firearms 24 hours a day. We have now been told, and this is what is surprising the Prime Minister and like me and those who know, that officers of the SSA were allowed long before November the 1st to keep and carry weapons. Hence the reason for the Prime Minister's expression of surprise in the context in which he used it. So I hope that that clarifies for you members of the media, as succinctly as I have put it, the discrepancy between what the Prime Minister would have said on the basis of his knowledge and understanding and firm belief, as opposed to the folly coming from the commissioner and the former commissioner. And I tell you, we are now aware that it was he who made those 4 military-type weapons available to the SSA before the 1st of November 2023, a matter which I am aware is in itself under investigation. And many more matters, because there are many, many questions to answer around all that has happened that took us to the point where we had to intervene and treat with the SSA in the way in which we are now treating with it. But in the main, the police are the ones, as the Prime Minister indicated, who brought the state of affairs around the SSA to the attention of the National Security Council, which the Prime Minister leads. And the police are now inside of there conducting a number of different streams of investigations, all of which are ongoing. That is, of course, item number 1. And at the appropriate time, we'll take any question that you have in that regard. The other matter that I want to address here today, and might I say before I proceed, of the former 6 heads of the SSA, those who are around and are able to speak and on the basis of records would never have issued firearms other than to guard their premises under the FUECs of which we speak, to keep and carry. Not one alive today would have done that. All of this is new and surprising, and partly the reason for the government's intervention in the way that we have. I would like to raise as well a very troubling matter, and this explains the presence of my very distinguished colleague, the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, who would have been central to the outflow, the filthy and unfortunate outflow, as I would describe it, of that matter that I'm about to raise with you now, members of the media, people of Trinidad and Tobago. In early February, actually, of 2021, there occurred in this country the very horrific kidnap, rape, and murder of a young citizen in East Trinidad. It must be burdensome to her family. My continued condolences to them and all of the people of Trinidad and Tobago who were affronted by that. A young woman by the name of Andrea Barat. it created a tremendous amount of stirring in the national community, and properly so. The upshot of that is the police, led by garrulous, childish Gary Griffith, arrested two persons who they considered prime suspects. I was not then Minister of National Security. I was looking on in horror as a former police officer, a former police instructor, a member of parliament of near 30 years, a minister of government at the time, a member of the National Security Council. I was looking on from across the fence in horror when I recognized that these two men were beaten to death in police custody. I had never before witnessed or heard of anything like that in all of my years as a citizen of this country. So the Newsday of the 3rd of February 2021 published a story which reads, Police Commissioner Gary Griffith has denied reports that a man who died while in police custody was beaten to death by officers. As early as that, denied it. Of course, since then, another man came into the mix. The story alludes to that going down the road. Police sources said the man was beaten severely by officers while in custody and believed he may have died from injuries. The man was a suspect in the disappearance of 22-year-old Clark Andrea Barrett. Speaking with Newsday on Wednesday, Gary Griffith said the man was arrested after a confrontation with police in Sangre Grande, where officers were injured but denied that they beat the suspect. The man in custody is quoted as saying here, the man was in custody and he was offered something to eat by the police, but he refused. Quoting again, he was placed in a chair when he fell. The officers acted swiftly and took him to the hospital where he died. Griffith also denied reports that he tried to withhold information on the man's death to the public. Earlier, police sources said Morris is the second man who was arrested by officers of the Special Operation Response Team SORT, S-O-R-T, not S-A-U-T-T, was beaten in front of his family when he was held around 3 a.m. and again while in police custody. The Prime Minister mentioned recently that the former commissioner had spoken to this matter and said that the man fell off, I think the Prime Minister said, a table. And up jumped. The Prime Minister didn't call any name. Members of the media, there are 5 former commissioners of police alive and well in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Stephen Williams, Mr. Everell Snaggs, Mr. Trevor Paul, Mr. James Filbert, and most recently, Mr. MacDonald Jacob. 5. And I say this to let you know the Prime Minister didn't call any name, but up jump the little noisy, childish, failed experiment, if I may call it that. He tried. He jumped in to say the Prime Minister lied because he never said that the men fall off a table. See when I tell you childish and childish what I mean? Whether it's table, chair, stool, bunk, bucket, that's not the issue. The issue is men were beaten and killed in police custody. So he jumps out to say he never said that the man died because he fell off a chair. The facts are in front of you. You all are sober and sensible members of the media and the national community. You will be the judge. But I want to play for you a clipping that was published a few days ago by that same failed experiment or effort to deal with serious national security matters through the police in this country. Please.
Let's go back to what this is about. These are two men who were involved in the killing of Andrea Barrett. They will never be able to kill again. They will never hurt another female again. And these were two men that were involved in over 60 other charges for rape. Politician could be so bold-faced to come and ask me for an update on an investigation. And I would have told him where to get off. That is one. Two, I would love to do a polygraph test myself on Keith Rory to show that he's a blatant liar. Show where it is that I would have ever told you that persons died because they fell off a chair. That is a blatant lie. Three, he is trying to allude, and no, this is a matter that took place 4 or 5 years ago, and he keeps holding on to that one point. But let's go back to what this is about. These are two men who were involved in the killing of Andrea Barrett. They will never be able to kill again. They will never hurt another female again. And these were two men that were involved in over 60 other charges for rape, sexual offenses for women. And that is what Keith Rowley continues to speak about. So because these two persons died at the hands of the police, he keeps trying to put me as if I am to blame for that situation. When, by the way, over 50 police killings have taken place every single year in the 3 years since I have left. And he has nothing to say about it. It shows how petty he is, it shows how immature he is, and it shows how intimidated he is of Gary Griffith.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, there are several matters around that clipping that this national community ought to take note of. You would have heard in that, he says this is some old matter happened a long time ago, 5 years ago. Talking about ignorance, murder is never statute bad. The matters of which he just spoke are under active police investigation, but he portrays it in a public expression as though that is as far back as 5 years ago. And it is the only little thing that keep Rowley holding against him. Only little thing? This is a serious matter still under police investigation. This ain't no little thing. This is a very, very serious matter. A very serious matter. And, of course, as I said, under continued investigation. When that matter transpired, around February of 2021, the United States government one of our major trading and friendly regional partners, so to speak, made contact with the government of Trinidad and Tobago through the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and told him certain things. The upshot of that, following on the beating to death in police custody, you would have heard Mr. Griffith say a while ago that they can't kill nobody again. You hear how flippant from a former commissioner of police? See why we said mistake? It is as if, for that reason, slam dunk, it's finished. It's not a bad thing. Well, I want you to listen carefully to the intervention now of the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, who will tell us of the implications of that for Trinidad and Tobago. Honorable.
Thank you very much, colleague, Minister of National Security. Yes, I'm pleased to join my colleague, ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon to place some additional facts on the public record in treating with matters of clear and present concern to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, with implications for our international relations and diplomacy. And just listening very closely to what has already been revealed by the Minister of National Security, I certainly cannot recall in the history of this country any former commissioner of police conducting himself in the manner as described, committing utterances toward a sitting prime minister in the manner that has been described and which every citizen is now familiar with. And the phrase that just keeps echoing in my mind is unsuitability, unsuitable for public office in any way, shape, or form. And just with regard to the implications, I want to begin by referencing another newspaper article. This is from the Newsday of Wednesday, 3rd February 2021. And the headline was, Commissioner of Police, suspect who died in police custody fell from chair. COP, Commissioner of Police, suspect who died in police custody fell from chair. And this was the then head of the police service, Police Commissioner Gary Griffith, placing on the public record his views of what transpired. And I will quote from the article. Police Commissioner Gary Griffith denied reports that a man who died while in police custody was beaten to death by officers. This is an article by Shane Superville. I go on. Police sources said the man was beaten severely by officers while in custody and believed he may have died from injuries. The man was a suspect in the disappearance of 22-year-old Andrea Barrett. The article goes on to state, speaking with Newsday on Wednesday, Griffith said the man was arrested but denied they beat the suspect. This is on public record, the Commissioner of Police of Trinidad and Tobago. And he's quoted here, the man was in custody and he was offered something to eat by the police, but he refused. The quote goes on. He was placed in a chair when he fell. The officers acted swiftly and took him to the hospital where he died. What I've said here is in quotation marks, referenced to the commissioner, the then Commissioner of Police, Gary Griffith. He was placed in a chair when he fell, and then the officers acted swiftly. Not too long after that, on March 24th, 2021, just weeks after those astounding and shocking public utterances by the Commissioner of Police, I received a visit at my office at the headquarters of the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs from the United States Embassy. The delegation was led by the then Chargé d'Affaires, Mr. Shante Moore. He met with me and the team at the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs on what he described as an urgent and important démarche. And he informed that as a result of the investigation into members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service's Special Operations Response Team, SORT, S-O-R-T, stemming from the Andrea Barath murder investigation in February 2021, a month before, the United States of America was obligated to cease all forms of security assistance to SORT under the U.S. Leahy law. The United States of America was obligated to cease all forms of security assistance to SORT under the U.S. Leahy law. 1 day after this, on March 25th, 2021, the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs received a diplomatic note issued by the United States of America directed to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. This note stated inter alia that the Special Operations Response Team of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service was hereby ineligible for any U.S. security assistance due to credible allegations that this unit, SORT, is implicated in acts that constitute gross violations of human rights. So what the former commissioner was boasting about publicly is being described in this diplomatic note as acts that constitute gross violations of human rights, GVHR. That diplomatic note remarked that the United States of America is ready to assist Trinidad and Tobago on strengthening oversight and accountability within its security services. By diplomatic note, on July 23rd, 2021, so there's a series of official communication being received by our government on this particular matter. July 23rd, 2021, the Embassy of the United States of America issued a reminder of the fundamental requirement under U.S. law for the U.S. government to obtain written agreement from Trinidad and Tobago and acknowledgement that no U.S. assistance under the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 or the Arms Export Control Act would be provided to a security force unit in Trinidad and Tobago, namely SORT, that has been separately identified by the U.S. Department of State as prohibited from receiving assistance under Section 620M of the Foreign Assistance Act, known as the Leahy Law. And there was subsequent communication initiated by the government of Trinidad and Tobago in response to these alerts and the information shared by the government of the United States of America. So when on one hand you have an incident that resulted in death. And the Commissioner of Police, as quoted in the media of Trinidad and Tobago, presenting, almost boasting, presenting a certain version of those events. You have a foreign government, our largest trading partner and the largest provider of overseas security assistance to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, taking clear action in such regard. And I just want to share for the public record a little further information about this Leahy law that was invoked in response to the actions and utterances that have already been described. The State Department Leahy law was made permanent in 1961. The United States government considers torture, extrajudicial killing, enforced disappearance, and rape under the color of law as gross violations of human rights when implementing the Leahy law. Incidents are examined on a fact-specific basis. The State Department Leahy law includes an exception permitting resumption of assistance if the Secretary of State determines and reports to Congress that the government is taking effective steps to bring responsible members of the unit to justice. The Leahy law of the Department of Defense is similar to the state Leahy law. It requires that the Department of Defense appropriated funds may not be used for any training, any equipment, any other assistance for a foreign security force unit if there is credible information that such a unit has committed a gross violation of human rights. And there are various steps that were taken subsequently, and as the Minister of National Security has already conveyed to the public, the sort was disbanded subsequently and replaced by another unit, the NOFT, the National Operational Task Force. And that resulted in a resumption of what Trinidad and Tobago had enjoyed previously. So you have a former commissioner of police who to this day references SORT as his brainchild publicly, who is on public record as defending what occurred and describing it in terms certainly inconsistent with the actions taken by the government of the United States of America, now challenging a sitting prime minister using language unbecoming and unbefitting of anyone who would seek to hold public office in this country. I now turn over once again to the Minister of National Security, having put certain facts on the public record today with respect to the consequences of what occurred back then under the watch, and that's the softest description I could give, under the watch of former Police Commissioner Gary Griffith. Colleague.
Thank you very, very much, Honorable Minister. And in practical terms, what this means is that, well, let me say on a daily basis as Minister of National Security, I would authorize and facilitate travel to all corners of the globe. Our military professionals, our police professionals, law enforcement professionals, intelligence operators, for training, for conferences, for support, for equipment, for help, especially in a world of transnational cooperation, transnational crime, and the need for transnational cross-border cooperation and work to dealing with the inflow of drugs, tons of it, tons, hundreds of tons of it, into our region, guns, the same things that we complain about every day as the murder figures go up. So this, every day, I authorize our personnel under assistance from our foreign partners, including, of course, the United States. And when you are defunded, when you are treated in the way Minister Brown explained, all of this goes through the window. The nation is seen in a certain way as a pariah state, and they are looking to see how you, the people, through your government, reacts to that kind of behavior. Hence the reason why these matters must be under investigation. So if you thought that talk about cockroach was bad, this was 100 times worse. And you heard him in the clip I played, gloating, they will never kill again. Oh yeah? He pronounced on a finding of guilt or otherwise, it sounds to me. But I have to wait until the matter is investigated, persons are prosecuted, and the court will deliberate on that. A lot of this has to do with the whole firearms scenario. This question about these guns playing around in the SSA and the pastor showing up, the apostle pastor showing up with 3 of them, coming from Gary Griffith, is part of the liberalist, crazy, surprising to the Prime Minister, surprising to me, surprising to all the decent, law-abiding people of Trinidad and Tobago who want to maintain Trinidad as a zone of peace. It is all tied up in there to the extent, as you know, we had 3 investigations when we began to hear murmurings and public disquiet about the dispensation of firearms in the country. Tom, Dick, Harry, drunk, deported, criminal record under 21 with gun. In some cases, 47 gun, 45 gun, 29 gun, just so. We became concerned because all commissioners, all previous governments, including the one that he was a part of, he was a Minister of National Security for 14 months. Still wet behind the ear. And all governments practice a restrictive policy on the business of firearms. And more so now, because the United States, there are many states in the United States that don't practice a restrictive policy where you assess an individual application on the basis of need, on the basis of capacity to safely manage this lethal weapon, inherently dangerous thing, and then you issue it on the basis of that. But there are many states in the US where it's far more liberal. You could go and buy it like a dinner mint, like a pack of nuts. And we have seen. And the United States today, I can see President Biden and others, even Barack Obama, pushing back against that because they experience 700, 750 mass shootings a year across the United States. It's mayhem. And they are trying to come back out of that. And we have this wet behind the ear little noisemaker pushing this philosophy about gun for everybody, use language about he will deputize the whole country and women need to have gun and they should apply for guns. So we had 3 investigations when we started to view what was happening. A former Assistant Commissioner Barrington and a Chief of Defense Staff called Pritchard, they conducted one. The second one was conducted, appointed by the Police Service Commission, Mr. Justice of Appeal Stanley John. He was commissioned by the Police Service Commission to conduct an investigation. And then, of course, I heard this noisy former commissioner experiment gone wrong, right? Saying that it is only, and I even saw it in a judgment of the court too. This is why I have to speak today to elucidate and to explain and to educate. I saw it even in a judgment in the court about his 4 civilians conducted an investigation. We, the government, the National Security Council, are working with the police commissioner at the time, Mr. McDonald Jacob, appointed 4 former police officers, one who was in charge of the police armory, the other two top investigators known across the police service and the land with significant investigating experience. Well, three of them with significant investigating experience and one who came out of the armorer shop, along with police officers who were serving at the time. Together, the 8 of them formed a team that looked at the firearms registry, the firearms record, to determine whether things were going in accordance with the Firearms Act of Trinidad and Tobago. And they issued a report. That was done with the corporation led by the Commissioner of Police at the time. It involved 4 serving officers along with these ex-police officers who had the kind of experience and the time and the facility working with the police service to get into. I saw in a judgment it was 4 civilians. And I heard Gary Griffith saying so. When we were about to share with you, the national community, through the parliament, the facts and circumstances as those 3 investigations found, Gary Griffith went to court and got the court to injunct those proceedings so that we, the government, cannot tell you what was happening. And there's where that stands to this day in respect of that 8-man team investigation. But Mr. Stanley John issued his report, which was initiated by the Police Service Commission. And he, as you well know by now, described what he found, I quote, as a well-oiled criminal white-collar enterprise under the nose of the then Commissioner of Police. That's how he described it. But you can't hear all that is happening in there, except, like last week, when Commissioner Christopher came up in the court in a firearms matter where a Tobagonian who claimed that his firearm license was not, his application was not concluded, considered in 7 years, meaning past commissioners would have not dealt with it, including the one just before Madam Christopher, and the one before that. And the court had to deliberate on that process. So it is, while the court injuncts the government from treating with these details are coming up in court matters and are being deliberated upon, to the extent that on behalf of the commissioner, somebody had to file an affidavit saying that, among other things, she had a heavy workload and COVID and a lot of reasons which caught the ire of Mr. Justice Frank C. Prasad, and he spoke fluently on it. The Prime Minister of this country, at the conversations that we last had at the Panyard in Tunapuna, in St. Augustine, he commented on that judgment. I was present. And reports flowed in the national newspapers. What the Prime Minister said at that time was that he can understand the ire of the judge, because the reasons given on behalf of the commissioner would have irked any reasonable person. According to the Prime Minister, that's what he said. He said, I can't fault the judge. I understand his grievance that led to his articulation in the way he did. That's what the Prime Minister said. You look back at it. He then went on a completely separate issue about the judge's comments on policy. What policy the government should adopt or should be adopted. Well, the Express newspaper of, I think it was yesterday, speaking about the passing of, under the rubric of the legacy of Michael de Labastide, who I appeared before on many occasions, who I happen to have had personal interfaces with, learned a lot from, and respect him like the entire legal profession and the world. The Express, in treating with the passing of Mr. Michael de Labastide, to whom we pay respectful honor and tribute for his contributions to this society and in particular in the field of law, the Express went on to say, permit me to quote, Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj argued that as a minister responsible for cabinet on all legal and judicial matters, he should approve the CJ's cabinet notes to ensure accountability, even though established practice had been private discussions beforehand, followed by acceptance from the executive. CJ de Labastide saw this as an attempt to undermine the judiciary and to drive him to resign. In a 52-page address at the 1999 opening of the law term, he said, and I'm quoting the former Chief Justice, "I give you the assurance I will not turn and run. My only regret is that those who wish to destroy me seem prepared to destroy or at least damage the institution of the judiciary in the process." Continuing, however, de Labastide was also cautious about judges overstepping their boundaries. In a 2007 paper, he wrote, and I quote, "Judges are not well equipped to make policy decisions, which are better left to those whose business it is to make them. The challenge to all Caribbean judges is to steer a course between the cilia of passivity and the charybdis of what I call judicial adventurism." You would have heard of the cilia and the charybdis, choice between two horrible options, so to speak. And he is saying that policy ought to be left to those whose business and duty it is to make them. Policymakers in the cabinet, in the government, resolved through legislation in the parliament. So the Prime Minister, in commenting at that forum, conversations, agreed with the judge on the one hand for the ire he expressed, and then went on to comment on another aspect of the judge's commentary, where he indicated what he thought the policy ought to be. But lo and behold, in the Newsday of Monday, the 1st of April 2024, under the rubric Judge Defends Judge After PM's Criticisms, the article reads, "A senior High Court judge has defended a colleague amidst criticisms from the Prime Minister on statements made in a ruling over delays by the Police Commissioner earlier with Christopher in deciding on firearm users license applications, where, of course, a Tobago businessman's 7-year wait on the FUL is what was before the court. And certain commentaries were made. And this senior judge is quoted in the article as saying, the judge pointed out that the state, through the Office of the Attorney General, was not involved in the case before CPASAD. It is therefore odd and inappropriate for the Prime Minister to attack the judge, and he is not in a position to say that the judge went a bit overboard." You see the word attack? I really have to wonder, what does that mean, you know? Prime Minister agreed with the judge and then simply said policy making is for the cabinet, agreeing with Michael de Labastide since 2007 and long before that. And this is here described as an attack, you know, by a quotation from the senior judge. It is therefore odd and inappropriate for the Prime Minister to attack the judge And he is not in a position to say that the judge went a bit overboard, which is what the Prime Minister had said. It is clear when one reads the judgment that the judge simply suggested a policy review based on the prevailing societal state, and there was no usurping of the role vested in the executive and parliament. That's the opinion of the senior judge. What Rowley said in the article here, Rowley said the judges did not have the power to make national policy, including on firearms. And he's quoted as saying, activist judges who speak as though they could make the policy and guide public servants what to do, I am saying that the government's policy ought to be respected. The government has no policy to arm the population like Gary Griffith has been doing and advocating in the political arena. A PNM government has a different approach. Those are the words of the Prime Minister being described as an attack. All I would say in closing on this matter is that it is a genuine pity that this senior judge did not take the time, the liberty, the courage to identify him or herself with these comments on this matter, and by so doing, exposes to you, the national community, all the judges of the court, particularly the senior ones, to this, what I personally consider to be a feeble argument. So members of the media, my colleague and I, on the example of the Prime Minister, come before you today to communicate with you as a society, as the public, as stakeholders, and to have you be told the truth and the facts. And we are now available to you for any questions that you may put to us in these regards. We thank you. Yes, sir.
Are you able to see the value of the assistance to have to be cut off? That's one. And two, what would have facilitated, why bring this, in terms of the information from the U.S. Embassy, why bring it to us now? There would have been an opportunity in the past 3 years to have done so. Why now?
Because I consider it necessary now, in light of recent developments, and I've always said that the business of national security is not to be conducted in the public and scandal and to-ing and fro-ing, however scandalously noisy that might, and however attractive that might be to some people. We prefer to conduct the business of national security with the stoicism, with the sobriety, with the seriousness, the confidentiality, and secrecy where necessary to protect the larger public interest. We share it with you now. In fact, truthfully speaking, I would have spoken about this before on various platforms with the media present. I hope that answers your question. I have given you examples of that: training, cooperation. You would have heard recently about the question of vetted units. There's transnational crime on serious proportions, and we collaborate with other agencies internationally, Interpol, and all intelligence gathering agencies. We cooperate and collaborate to fight transnational crime, and therefore they want to be confident that when they're sharing information with us, they're sharing with vetted, trusted, responsible people who are not going to use that information to perpetrate, as the minister described, gross violations of human rights and other things. So I've given you examples of what this corporation is, tremendous amount of training. I told you on a daily basis, I can deal with 6, 7 of those matters. So to put a dollar value to it now is near impossible, but just take it from me, it is substantial, it is significant in dollar terms.
I'm not sure if Minister Brown or you, Minister Hines, can answer this. Just with regards to what's happening with the SSA now, has the U.S. government reached out to the Jamaican government to express any concern, given what you've said about the sword?
I am not in a position to say so. I do know that we collaborate with our international partners on an ongoing basis, largely through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and largely through the Prime Minister of the country. Such collaboration is an ongoing business.
Mr. Levin, just to add to the response to your specific question, I can tell you that as Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, I have received no démarche, no outreach from the government of the United States of America or any of our foreign partners with respect to any concern about gross violations of human rights since that particular reference that I placed on the record this evening. That was the only time during my tenure that matters had come to that level that necessitated the response from the government of the United States of America, and the record would show when that occurred and who was in charge of the police service at that particular time and who was overseeing SORT at that particular time.
Prior to the U.S. getting involved and sending the concerns to the government, was the government at all concerned themselves that there was something amiss with SORT, given the incident that took place?
Of course, it was reported in the national community. I mean, we as members of the government, we as individuals, I was very deeply concerned when that young woman was kidnapped and she was found murdered someplace. I mean, I saw the anguish, I saw the pain, and I felt it too, as a citizen of this country, as a man. So we were concerned. But of course, when the commissioner came out and made a statement in response to questions from the media, we took note of what he had to say, and then as Minister Brown explained, we started getting feedback from the US and so on. He gave the explanation, and I mean, I was astounded when I saw his recent comments, which I shared here with you today. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, what's the way you call it, a démarche? I wouldn't be surprised if another 2 démarches pop up here tomorrow. When I listened to the clip that I shared with you a while ago, I'd be surprised if none floats through the minister's door. Please.
Now, given the timeline that you gave Dr. Brown, it seemed that a month had passed between the incident and the first contact that the U.S. made. Within that time frame, what, if anything, and this is probably going directly to you, Mr. Hines, even though, as you said,
An investigation was
then
initiated.
the Minister of National Security.
You go ahead.
But what did the cabinet government said or done to address the concerns that were raised prior to the government of the U.S. getting involved? And I'm speaking specifically, not only death of Andrea Hart, aside like this, but the deaths of Mr. Balcon and Morris Everybody.
Well, I am certain that the Minister of National Security, because those deaths took place in February, based on the way we operate, the ethos, the policy we ride on, I am almost certain that the Minister of National Security would have communicated to the then Commissioner of Police the need for thorough police investigation into this matter. I'm almost certain that the records in the Parliament might show questions and I'm sure, because we are always to account to the public, either through the parliament or more directly through you members of the media. So I am sure. But when I came on deck in April of 2021, I maintained my deep concern, and I am aware that an investigation continues. Of course, if those were the two prime suspects and they were killed, then it puts a brake on those investigations. But I am assured from the police that investigations continue.
One last question before we sort this. There's an ongoing investigation by the SSA at this time. From your information, is there any relationship between SORT as it then was and the SSA and the way it operated, given what you said about the former Commissioner of Police granting firearms to the SSA?
I'm not in a position to say that.
You also mentioned that the selection of Mr. Gary Griffith was a failed experiment.
Well, those are my words. It shouldn't really be. It was I say a failed effort, because I am aware that the government was concerned, as the rest of the national community, that we had Mr. Williams, for an example, acting as commissioner for 6 years. We had promotions processes come to the parliament, and we could not find, we as a state couldn't find immediate, suitable, acceptable replacement, because we had not up to that point. And the focus of the government was to stabilize the police service, allow it to have a leader, substantive leader, which we eventually did in Mr. Jacob, and now with Commissioner here with Christopher. But that was the issue. But more than that, Professor Ramesh Deosaran led a team which conducted a human resource, a manpower audit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. I was chairman of the Joint Select Committee on National Security when that report was presented to the Honorable Prime Minister. And the Honorable Prime Minister, in his very democratic and sensible and sober way, laid that report in the Parliament, and it came before those of us who was on that Joint Select Committee on National Security. And perusing that report as I did then, and have continued to do, one of the things that that report demonstrated is that it appeared as though the police service at that time appeared incapable of producing the kind of leadership that it needed. So I suspect all those things would have been operating in the minds of those of us who had to decide, looking for some commissioner. There was a process that took place. The then choice emerged high on that list, so to speak. It was considered that he had former national security experience. It was considered that he had former advisory leadership history. It was considered that he came out of a very disciplined organization, the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, and the need, and these things taken together, the chance was put on him. A bad bet it turned out to be, for which the Prime Minister has 3 times apologized to you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, saying it was his gravest mistake. And I count as Minister of National Security, because it happened under my watch, that his departure from that office, with all the brouhaha and the noise and all the old talk, was a very outstanding success for the Ministry of National Security, for the police service, and for Trinidad and Tobago. Well, as you know how the process works, the Police Service Commission is who conducts the assessment of applicants. that was done in that case. By the time it comes to the Parliament for the parliamentary intervention in the process, the Service Commission would have gone through all the rudiments, the application, the vetting, the background checks, and all of that, the interviews, all of that. It comes to the Parliament. And we at the level of the Parliament can only rely on that, and to the extent that we have any personal knowledge or experiences, which when deputy commissioners come to the Parliament or the commissioner for consideration under the constitutional process in the law, you will hear we'll make reference to this fact. I mean, this is what comes to us, and we are limited in terms of what we might know personally or otherwise, and it is that sort of thing. So yes, the government has said we backed the wrong tree. We accept that.
You mentioned two things that I wanted to touch on. DCP coming before Parliament and Commissioner of Police. The Commissioner of Police contract comes in next month, if I'm not mistaken. Can you give us an update on possible extension or the cancelling of that contract? And secondly, in response to my question previous to this one, you spoke of the accolades of Mr. Griffith, he spent time in the military and all these things. You also spoke highly of Mr. Wendell Lucas, who is the head
I only, just let me intervene to say, I highlighted to you some of the things that may have been taken into account when a decision had to be made in relation to him. Yeah.
That's in the connection I'm making, that also when Mr. Lucas came before the Parliament, you yourself spoke highly of him, but the government did not accept his selection as...
It was not the government, Mr. Levan. You don't understand the process.
Parliament.
It was the Parliament. Just a second. It was not the government. The process requires the Parliament to intervene, not the government. The government accepts, receives through the Parliament the nomination put forward by Her Excellency after the process I described inside of the Police Service Commission. And 41 persons sitting in the Parliament have a vote. And you and I can't dictate to any of the 41. Well, no, I could dictate to one, the member for Laventille West. But I can't dictate to the other 40 what they should support and what they should not support. So just by way of a corrective, I think that might have put a bit of an abortion to your question, is it?
So, I thank you for the correction.
Yes.
It's a simple majority and the government has that simple majority. So whether or not the opposition would have voted, it's all up to the government who has the majority.
No, it's the Parliament, sir. It's every member of Parliament voting aye or no. It's the Parliament, sir. Don't be sidetracked.
Parliament has the last say. Parliament did not accept Mr. Wendell Lucas.
Which is all that the process calls for.
Why did the government not support?
You will have to ask every member of the House that.
Let me ask both of you, why didn't both of you?
He was
I'm not a member of the House.
Mr. Levan, you should play for the West Indies. You're getting it so wrong. You good all wrounder.
Why didn't you?
Now, that's just a little fatigue. Don't take it to heart. Yeah. Don't take it to heart. I have my own views about that, and I think it might be a little irregular for you to ask me that. I conducted a vote. You are not one of my constituents, are you? Okay, thank you very kindly.
The first part of my question regards to the Commissioner of Police existing contract, which concerns police.
Yeah, the Police Service Commissioner is appointed by the Police Service Commission. It is they who are responsible for her accounting to them, largely, and for her hiring and for her removal from office. The Police Service Commission is the body that does that. Yes. Because she had an extension of her service in accordance with the Police Service Act, Chapter 1501. And by virtue of that extension, she continues, but it was the operation of law. But as Commissioner of Police, she is accountable to the Police Service Commission. And when the time comes, the law says her service for the period past will be reviewed, and it is on that review decisions will be taken. It is impossible for me to prejudge or tell you anything about that now.
And that review will have to be done in Parliament. Yes?
Not necessarily. It is done by the Police Service Commission. She is in office. She is the commissioner, and all that is required is further extensions on a yearly basis.
Wasn't that first extension granted by Parliament, government/Parliament?
By the Parliament?
Government/Parliament. I don't want to get into
No,
that.
this is the operation of law in accordance with the Police Service Act. It is dictated in the law how this is done.
But the Police Service Commission is not the one who...
She accounts to the Police Service Commission.
I understand that, but the
Yes.
contract, the yearly contract, after she has reached the age of...
Yes, and when following what comes from there, a contract is issued for the period.
That the government must sign off on.
Well, once the government accepts that her review is favorable, which is the normal way it's done, in accordance with the law. Thank you very much.
Minister Hines and Minister Brown. Switching gears a bit, there are reports online that member of staff at the Washington Embassy, Mr. Weeks, is one who would have introduced Major Best to Mr. Pastor Brown, or to play some role in that establishing a relationship. Given his role at the embassy, where Brigadier Spencer, who is now leading the SSA, would have also come from. What are your thoughts on that?
On what?
Brigadier Spencer coming from the embassy, where Mr. Weeks would have introduced Major Best, who Brigadier Spencer replaced, to Pastor Brown, and taking his place at the SSA. What are your thoughts on that link, Mr. Weeks being connected to previous SSA, who's in charge of the SSA, and the current person in charge of the SSA, and his connection as well to Pastor Brown?
You said you saw that on social media?
Not on social media, on newspaper reports.
Okay, well, newspaper reports are sometimes just that. I have no thoughts on that matter.
Yes, and I as well am not in a position to verify or validate who introduced whom to whom or anything that you've said in your question. So it is difficult to answer directly.
Sticking with the SSA, I'm sure my colleague will have some further questions on the SSA as well. I mean, are you, compared to the Wishmi Ramnaran scandal perhaps, are you prepared to say that this is an even larger scandal and for the SSA, and what does it say for the future of the organization?
Well, what I can tell you is that once some of the state of affairs, sufficient of the state of affairs became known to the government, after briefing from the police, the government came to a place where it considered that what it had heard was sufficiently important for governmental action to be taken. Such action was promptly taken. The government, as you know, sent the then director on administrative leave with no pronouncements as to innocence or guilt. A new director is in place. He is doing audits and making sure that things continue to operate, and out of that, reports will come and decisions will then be taken. At this stage, it is quite premature, quite early, especially from out here, for me to comment beyond that.
Going back to an earlier statement you made, you said that
No,
enterprise.
let's get it right.
Well-oiled, criminal white-collar enterprise
Something like that, Mr. Levin.
that took place under the nose of then Commissioner of Police.
That is how Mr. Stanley John described it.
Yes. This entire SSA fiasco can be described as happening under your nose. Do you take responsibility for what is happening now, what we are seeing unfolding now?
Of course, I am responsible to the cabinet. I'm responsible to the parliament. I'm responsible to the people, which is why partly I am here today. So responsibility under the Constitution is quite clear.
But do you take responsibility in the sense that
You mean blame? Don't mix up blameworthiness with responsibility, you know. No, it's not the same. No, it's not the same. Blame is one thing. Responsibility in the constitutional sense is another, something I have tried to share with this nation on several occasions in the past. But I can't know, I could not have known who the SSA was hiring, whether it was members of one church or next, whether it was members of one family or next. I could not have known that. As a matter of fact, had I known that, and had I known that, I may have stopped it long before now. But more than that, if you, Mr. Johnson Levin, and your other colleagues in the media, some erstwhile, some who have gone before you, had you gotten up a morning and heard a complaint that Minister Hines was down inside of the SSA deciding who, whether it's Amory Brown or some other Brown, or Mr. Gray, Mr. Black, or Mr. White.
No relation.
No relation. you would have taken a whole page in your Newsday to complain about ministerial involvement and interference, wouldn't you? Nothing more to be, not you. You'd do it twice. Anyway.
Let me go a little further in response to Mr. Levin. I think what would distinguish Minister Hines and his response here and set it apart from some of what we would have discussed earlier is that the Minister of National Security did not act in a premature or light-hearted manner, did not go on the public record to defend or create any smoke screen to cover the concern, did not produce any false narrative to misguide or misdirect the population, did not advance any alibi to try to cover a concern related to any unit that may have fallen under his oversight, but initiated action, the results of which we are seeing today. So I just wanted to separate the earlier component of this media conference and what was put on the public record from the responsible actions taken in this particular period by this Minister of National Security.
In which case,
So
In light of all that is happening at Haiti right now, is there any consideration, and thankfully we are here with Mr. National Security, to send some of our regimental officers to Haiti to assist?
please support me and get there yet.
So what I can tell you is that Trinidad and Tobago has been in support of actions to treat with the Haiti situation. We have provided financial support as well as human resources to CARICOM's Good Offices efforts, to the Eminent Persons Group, and to the other diplomatic foundation that has been laid in preparation for the multinational force. With respect to contribution of boots on the ground, as it were, the Prime Minister has made it very clear, and that is the current position of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, that we are not in a position to contribute military forces, police officers or boots on the ground at this stage to that particular effort. So that position is maintained. In fact, in a few moments, I will be joining a heads of government meeting on the Haiti situation to receive updates and to contribute to CARICOM's further interface with that very concerning crisis. So that's the clear position of the government of Trinidad and Tobago.
Mr. Hines, my final question is a two-part question. One, are you aware of the number of SRPs that were assigned to the SSA under the former Commissioner of Police, given that we've seen the spying pastor with police guns assigned to the unit? And secondly, with regards to all that we've seen coming out of this whole fiasco, if you want to call it that, do you think that the hiring practices of the SSA ought to be given a little more scrutiny, if not parliamentary scrutiny, parliamentary oversight?
Well, there already exists parliamentary oversight under the SSA Act, the act that's established the SSA. There's a mandate, there's a mandatory that they report annually to the Parliament, and that has been done. SSA personnel has appeared before the National Security Joint Select Committee on National Security. I answer questions in the Parliament about the SSA, so there is already parliamentary accountability in that regard. In terms of the hiring practices, you learn as you go along. The SSA has been in existence for a very long time. We've never had this before. Something has developed. So you now learn from this and you rearrange your affairs. You increase the height of your fences to ensure that that which popped up, that which has happened, doesn't easily happen again or at all again. Thank you very warmly. I am unable to tell you that immediately, but it's a matter that I can find out.
My final two questions. First one is in light of the multi-million-dollar judgment regarding the minor detention center, you would say what's the future of the detention center, one, and two, just your thoughts on the recent death of a prisoner following a brawl at the Oxford prison.
Well, in respect of the latter half of your question, the matter is under investigation by the police, and for that reason alone, it would be imprudent for me to venture a comment upon it. It is very unfortunate that someone, a citizen, would have lost his life. Always going to be unfortunate. In the prison environment as I know it, having had responsibility for the prison for many years, including now as Minister of National Security, you're going to have these upheavals, we're going to have riots, we're going to have sit-ins, you're going to have issues. Prison officers are trained and prepared to deal with issues. We've had, like everywhere else in the world, unfortunately, cases where prison officers act outside of the law and outside of their lawful authority. All of these matters will be in the mix as an investigation into the facts and circumstances of this matter is made known. I have to be patient. I urge you to be patient in that regard equally. Well, I can give the family the assurance from where I am in terms of what the police investigation, in terms of assessment by the Forensic Science Center. No haste will be spared to provide the answers that they quite naturally, as a family afflicted, would seek. Well, that, you're talking about the heliport,
yeah.
That has been declared as an immigration station. It is. At the moment, there are no persons therein, but from time to time it will be used for those purposes. We have a detention center, the immigration detention center in Aripo, but the capacity is sometimes a little less than we have persons. And once that's the case, we have done repair works down there. There are some other things to be done, and we continue to do that. But yes, it is, and it will for the foreseeable future remain a place where we can securely, safely, and constitutionally house illegal migrants pending their repatriation to their homes as the laws of Trinidad and Tobago provide for. We always take what the court says into account. Always. We are very mindful of the importance of, the significance of, and the independence of the judiciary. For me personally, as an officer of the court myself, an attorney at law, my respect for the court, my respect for the judiciary remains unchallenged. And therefore, when a judge, I told you just now, in the case of Vishal Singh, the police officer who was shot by a prison officer, we, the government, immediately reacted. So I read judgments when they come on matters touching and concerning my ministry. The minister does the same in relation to his. And we learn from them. We benefit from them. But we know when we hear policy discussions, that is our domain, and we will treat with that. But in terms of improving all that we do, because the executive is one arm of the state, there are three arms: the parliament, the judiciary, and the government or the executive. We work together in the interest of the state. So we share with each other, we benefit from each other, we learn from each other. Each is a check and balance on the other. And the judiciary guards its domain rather jealously, as it should. The parliament guards its domain very jealously, as it must. And certainly the executive will guard its domain equally jealously, as we must. May I thank you all very warmly. Good luck and God bless.
My name is Nabila. I'm 18.